Alright, so my opinion on this film is a little different. This film is being hated and just dragged and shat on. I completely understand why people have this opinion of the film, but mine's a little different. Now, I'm not saying that this movie is great. It's nowhere near great. But it's okay. It's not as terrible as people are saying, in my opinion. Now, I went into this thinking I wouldn't like it. The Venom franchise, for me, it's okay. It's actually really disappointing for me. That first movie, it was like a PG Venom. Every single kill was like a cutaway. You don't see any of the Venom, like, violence and carnage. The buddy cop vibe with Venom and Eddie is funny. I like that. The second one, pretty much more of the same. They upped it a bit in terms of what you see on screen, but it was alright. They're both sort of forgettable. But Venom: The Last Dance, for me, is the best out of the three. Now, a lot of people were saying the movie's way too goofy, way too silly, and I completely agree. This movie is very silly. It takes that buddy cop vibe with Venom and Eddie, and it turns it up to 100. But for me, it worked. We know from the first two that these Venom movies aren't serious in the slightest. So they've just taken what they've done in the first two and turned it up. They've doubled down on it. I get that people are mad, but for me, it worked. For majority of the jokes between those two, it worked. There was some parts that the movie was too absurd, like that dance scene, for example. That scene goes on for 2 minutes, and it is... I was sort of sitting there cringing. Like, it was comparable to that singing scene in the Marvels. It was just as bad. That was pretty stupid. But for me, the jokes and the comedy, it landed. And the action in this film, for me, is the best out of all three films. The last act in this movie is absolutely mental. You've got all the symbiotes from the comics. I forget most of their names, but they're all battling. They're all fighting this one enemy. There's explosions. There's fucking actual graphic violence on screen like you'd expect from a real Venom Carnage movie. And the last act was a lot of fun. It was like 20-30 minutes, and it was epic in my opinion. And the ending to this film, for me, was a pretty perfect ending for this trilogy. And I won't lie, for a trilogy I really don't care too much about, it was a tearjerker for me. I was fucking... I had tears in my eyes, I'm not gonna lie. The ending to this film is very unexpected and very well written in my opinion. I really liked the way this film ended. All the CGI was great for the most part too, which was the biggest surprise. Normally in these Marvel, Sony films, the CGI is terrible and rushed, but it actually looked pretty good here. So they were the positives. There are quite a few negatives. As I said, this movie isn't great, but it's not terrible. There's a side story with one of the scientists and her brother. Like, her brother was like struck by lightning when he was little or something, and she sees, I don't know, it ties into the end of the film somehow, and I did not care for this story at all. Like, the scenes with her and her other lab partners, they go on for like 5-10 minutes at a time, and I just didn't care. All I wanted to see was Venom and Eddie together, because it is, after all, the last movie, or so we think. I guarantee you it won't be. But that's all I wanted to see. So when they were straying away into this side story with this girl and her brother, I just didn't give a shit. And there really was no moments of seriousness, except for maybe the last 5 minutes of the film. Even when they're in dire situations, they're still cracking jokes. 80% of the jokes work, but that 20% is when the film really needed to be serious and just understand that the story that they're trying to tell shouldn't be this goofy. And the actual story of them trying to hunt down Venom, it's typical. It's done a million times. I can compare it to the Bumblebee movie, where Cena is after Bumblebee, but Bumblebee's clearly the good guy. It's the same here. So as I said, I really don't get the over-hate of this film. You know what you're going into when it comes to these Venom movies. They're nowhere near perfect, but we know that they're not comic book accurate. This is what they've given us, and we just got to take it. And for me, this is the best out of the three. And I am in no way a defender of these Marvel Sony movies. Marvel, for me, has fallen off. I don't give a fuck about any of these films coming out. The last few have been terrible. I will shit on Marvel films when I need to, and I'll shit on these Sony films when I need to. But for me, this just doesn't deserve all the hate that it's getting. And some people are comparing this to Madam Web. I think that's a fucking insult. Madam Web was one of the worst, not just the worst superhero films, one of the worst movies of all time. I really did enjoy some aspects of this film and I had a really good time with it. And in terms of all three, this is the one I probably rewatch the most. So I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10. So if you've seen the film, let me know what you think, and thanks always for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.